In those days, at least one woman in 100 would have her nose chopped off. You may well ask why. It's because of the Sasu, who would poison her son's mind. These saces ruined the lives of innocent women forever. Every day the Maharwada would resound with the cries of hapless women in some house or the other. Husbands, flogging their wives as if they were beasts, would do so until the sticks broke with the effort. The heads of these women would break open, their backbones would be crushed, and some would collapse unconscious. But there was nobody to care for them. They had no food to eat, no proper clothing to cover their bodies, their hair would remain uncombed and tangled, dry from lack of oil. Women led the most miserable existence. The entire day, the poor daughter-in-law would serve the entire household like a slave. The Sasu, Sasra, brothers and sisters-in-law, the neighbors, she had to serve one and all. The household chores were no less torturous. Many daughters-in-law would try to run away to escape this torture. Once night fell, darkness would descend everywhere, at home, in the village, on the roads. When everybody was fast asleep, the harassed daughter-in-law would pick up a couple of rags and run away under the cover of darkness. It was not at all an easy thing to do. There were no vehicles in those days to take her quickly to her mother's home. The young girl had to be entirely on her own. She had to be extremely careful and watch each step she took. She had to find her way in pitch darkness, through hills and valleys and thick forests. She had to cross streams and rivers. Her escape would take place in mortal fear lest people who knew her in-laws were watching her. It would take her at least 2 days to reach her mother's home. Immediately on her heels would follow her brother-in-law or Sasra or her husband. Nobody, neither her in-laws nor any of the others, had any sympathy for the poor tortured girl. The husband or the in-laws would beat her to a pulp. Even her brother and father would flog her mercilessly and ask the in-laws to take her back. The poor girl, numb with pain and hunger, was forced to return to her husband's home. Once she was brought back to her in-laws' house, an even worse fate awaited her. Her in-laws would take a huge square piece of wood, weighing around 5 kilos, to the carpenter to have stocks made for her. The carpenter would drill a hole in the wood, big enough for her foot to go through. After this, they would put an iron bar through the sides so as to make it impossible for her to pull her foot out. The wood itself would be as huge and heavy as a large iron tub. She would have to drag this heavy burden each time she tried to move. She was forced to work with this device around her leg. Her leg would get wounded and blood would ooze out every time she tried to move her leg. She was not a human being for her in-laws, but just another piece of wood. Her hair would be all tangled and spread around her head in complete disarray. She would be made to wear her younger brother-in-law's copper anklets as bangles. Those copper bangles were a sign that she was a mahar. Besides, she had to constantly listen to the abuses of her Sasu and Sasra, whose tongues would never tire of lashing out at her. The Sasu would pinch her cheeks black and blue, her Sasra would thrash her day and night. The poor girl would endure this torture for as long as she could. When it became unbearable, she would run away with the stocks around her bloodied foot. When such girls managed to reach the Maharwada, people crowded around to see them. We kids found the entire scene extremely curious. The Sasu would pour poison in her son's ears against his hapless wife. She would whisper into his ears, "Dandia, what good is such a runaway wife to you? Some bastard must have made her leave you. She must be having an affair. You are her husband, but obviously the bitch prefers someone else. I suspect that this somebody is from our own community. This bitch will bring nothing but disgrace to us. No, no. I don't want such a slut in my house. She wants to ruin your life. Don't let her off so easily. Dandia, cut off the tip of her nose, only then will my mother's heart breathe easy. Don't bring shame on your father's name. And don't you worry, I'll get you as many wives as you want. I'll get you remarried in just a couple of days. I have already chosen a girl for you. She has a son from her previous marriage. But do not keep this wife of yours. She is not at all good for you. Otherwise, you will suffer like that woman who bought a farm at an inconspicuous corner so that she could till her land in peace, but on the way, she met a Musulman and he chopped off her nose and breasts too. We don't want such a string of problems in our house." This speech was followed by a drama of shedding false tears, which the Sasu pretended to wipe off with her sari. She would then hide her face in it, and after a suitable pause, she would continue, "What would this slut have done if she had to suffer like us? Probably, she would have committed suicide. God. We did not even dare to speak to the dog and hen in our in-laws' house disrespectfully. Even when we had to shoo them away, we had to address them with respect. We did not get food to eat for 4 days at a stretch. We had to stealthily pluck some leafy vegetables from the fields, cook them and gobble them down without any salt. Even these would be difficult to get. We had to suffer so much. Oh, how we suffered. Just like Sita suffered during her exile." Torrential tears would follow this outburst. Then the Sasra would take over. He would urge his son to be a brave hero. "You are a man. You must behave like one. You must be proud and firm. You must walk tall. Twirl your mustache and show us that you are a man. Are you wearing bangles like a woman? Then, do you know about that ayah of yours? He was a distant relative, of course. Let me tell you, he was a real hero among men. He could fell down any wild beast, however ferocious, at one stroke. He used to carry an axe with him at all times. Once his wife smiled at his cousin. Finished. He lured her with sweet words, took her to a field and just axed her down. Cut her into pieces then and there. The entire Maharwada trembled on hearing his name. Such is your lineage, remember. Never mind if you have to go to prison for 6 months. You must chop off your wife's nose and present it to her brother and father. They mustn't have any respect left to sit with the members of the Panch. This speech would go to the son's head. His ego would inflate like a balloon. Then both father and son would make a plan for chopping off the girl's nose. The Sasra would go to her mother's place, and with sweet words, bring her back. Meanwhile, the son would keep ready a razor sharpened to an edge. At night, he would sit on her chest and taking his own time, cut off her nose. Then they would drive the poor girl out of the house, with blood pouring from the mutilation. None of her relatives would give her shelter. She was called muddy, and was refused entry in the so-called good homes. Then her Sasu would happily arrange a second marriage for her son, with some divorced woman with a couple of children. She would feel elated that the harassment she had suffered was being finally compensated for. An innocent girl would thus be sacrificed to atone for the Sasu's suffering. Such inhuman practices were quite rampant, almost till the 1940s. The poor girls were ill-starred, as it were. Mahar women were supposed to draw their pallav forward from the forehead down to the nose. Now, if an innocent child bride was found to have neglected this, and if anybody saw her pallav drawn back even a little, it was provocation enough for all the sases around to pounce upon her. Immediately, they would taunt her, "Hey, from where have you obtained such a daughter-in-law? Her mother must be a slut. Why, her pallav just doesn't stay on her forehead. Whenever we look at her, it is always up on her head." Then the Sasu would add fuel to this fire, "Now see for yourself. Otherwise you will blame me for not being able to stand her. What should I tell you, my friend? You asked me about her mother, right? What shall I tell you? Such a slut she is. God knows what she does. And this one here is her child, isn't she? What else can you expect then? Like mother, like daughter. A slut's daughter will be a slut. A good woman's daughter will be good. Fix her pallav on her head with a nail. That's the only way to make it stay there. The bitch, her mother, deceived us. She has tied a kawatan around our neck. Tell me, Atayabai, what will happen to my son? How will he survive with this woman? He is simple-minded as Lord Shiva." Again, tearful talk would follow. "Kaki, it's all right till we're alive. But what will happen after us? This bitch will twist him around her little finger." Then the Sasu would begin to wail loudly. Her companions would gladly join the wailing. Such was the life of our poor hapless daughters-in-law. The life of the women in the lower castes was thus shaped by the fire of calamities. This made their bodies strong, but their minds cried out against this oppression. A woman is Sattva and Shil incarnate. She can put even her creator to shame. Just as the Shatavarna system created castes and sanctioned discriminatory practices, the cunning creator of the world established the practice of making women dependent on men. Men have therefore dominated women ever since. But a woman is goddess Amba on the earth who gives birth to man and sustains that unjust creature with her very lifeblood. After having undergone the ordeal of fire for ages, she finally gave birth to a divine flame. This flame showed the world what true love and affection is. Then it tore off the net in which men had trapped women for ages and rescued them. This was what is known as the Hindu code. Bill. The man who gave birth to the Hindu code bill was my King Bhim, the son of morality, savior of the world. It is because of him that my pen can scribble out some thoughts. It is because of him that I have understood truth, that I can now see how morality is being trampled upon. It is because of him that I got the inspiration to join the struggle against oppression and contribute my small mite to it. In a sense, I am grateful to Virgon and the people there who nurtured me with their love. In fact, Virgon has a lion's share in helping me perceive truth. I will never forget the love they bestowed upon me since my birth. I could enter any house that I wanted to. I was completely engulfed in the relationships I had formed with the men, women, and children in each house. I would move among them calling them mama and mommy. The woman of the house would bring out plates full of dried pieces of meat from a storage jar. There would be maggots in some of the bones. She would brush them off in the hot sun. Once the meat pieces were clean enough, she would put them to cook in a big earthen pot. She would roast some onions over the chulha, along with some chilies and haldi, roast some dhania seeds on a piece of burning coal, and grind them all to a powder on the grinding stone. Then she would put a piece of coal in this mixture of spices to make it green. Once the meat pieces were cooked, she would add the spices to it with some jowar flour to thicken the dish. Then other women would make big jowar bakris. The Sasu would first serve the food to the menfolk and the children. Each of the men would get a big plateful of the meat dish, along with some 6 bakris and some raw onions. Children usually shared the plates with the men. Bakris would be mixed with the meat, and the children would eat with lusty appetite. All of us children would look for delicacies like liver. Everybody would invite me to have a share from their plate. The taste of that food is still fresh on my tongue. Even great dishes from so-called posh hotels fade in comparison to the food we had. In those days, there was no distinction between breakfast and lunch. Breakfast itself would be like lunch. Nobody knew about tea. It was made only in my Aji's house. My Aya was a butler and hence he was used to having tea. So we too got into the habit of drinking tea. Just the two of us, Aji and I, lived in the house in Virgon. Aji used to prepare tea in the morning. We would eat the stale bakri, left over from last night's meal, with the tea. Then Aji would go to collect firewood with the other women, and I would roam all over the place, visiting any house I wanted to. I would sit down to eat with anybody who had finished cooking. Dry meat pieces would be available only with the mahars of the 16th share. The other houses did not have anything to eat. Those people were like insects crawling around in hunger. With no food to eat, at least a couple of people would be ill in each house, lying down in rags. They would be almost lifeless with hunger since even ordinary food was scarce. In their desperate search for solutions, they clung to the belief that a sick man could become well with simple remedies. Then they would come to my Aji's house and say, "Sita, everybody in my house is sick. They are all down. So I thought your tea would help them. Tea is the real remedy. People get well immediately. You know, once Malhari also gave me a bowlful of tea and my sickness just disappeared. So I thought maybe I should give all my people bowls of tea." My Aji would advise Atayabai, get sugar worth 3/4 of a paisa, get tea powder worth a damdi. Then boil a jar of water in a pan. Put sugar and tea powder in it and bring it to a boil. Your entire household will be able to drink tea. Oh, but there is no pan in my house. All right. Then heat the water in a tawa, and once it starts boiling, remove it from fire and strain it. Your tea will be ready. The woman would follow Aji's advice and give everybody some tea to drink, and they would all feel better after drinking the tea. They believed that tea was a good medicine. In those days, the tawas were not flat like the modern ones. They would be deep like a flattish bowl. The whole family could drink tea in one paisa. Yet they could not afford to drink tea because they could not afford even that one paisa. They breathed, therefore they were supposed to be alive. Each generation left their children to serve their oppressors and quietly got wiped off from the face of the earth. Poor people had a lifespan of hardly 30 or 40 years. One generation perished, but the next generation would be ready to serve Mother Earth and the monsters ruling over it. On the one side, there was the entire society, arrogant and insolent, enjoying wealth and comfort, and on the other side, there were people dying without food, like fish out of water. But character, truth and morality among the oppressed did not die. The three qualities merged and were realized in the form of Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar. He was our Bali Raja who gave away his kingdom for truth. He was like Rawan who squandered away his kingdom for character. He was our Buddha who taught love, brotherhood and equality unto all. He was our beam, our king and our savior, who blessed the blind with sight. He was the weapon forged out of the perfect blend of the three qualities of character, truth and morality, to fight injustice and to break the chains of slavery that shackled our feet.